The moment his shadow fell across my table, I knew my life would never be the same. But let me take you back to where this impossible night began. My name is Elena, and until 3 months ago, I believed fairy tales were just stories we told ourselves to survive the mundane reality of existence. I worked as an art curator at a modest gallery in the heart of the city, spending my days surrounded by beauty created by others, while my own life remained a blank canvas. My friends called me a romantic, though I preferred the term optimist. There's a difference, you know. A romantic expects magic. An optimist simply refuses to stop hoping for it. That particular evening started like any cautionary tale about modern dating. My colleague Sarah had insisted on setting me up with her boyfriend's friend, someone she described as successful, charming, and ready to settle down. The holy trinity of blind date descriptors that usually translate to arrogant, boring, and recently divorced. But I agreed anyway because hope springs eternal, even for those of us who should know better. The restaurant she chose was one of those places that tries to hard. You know the type. Exposed brick walls, Edison bulbs hanging at carefully calculated heights, a menu written in a font that's supposed to look handwritten but clearly isn't. The kind of establishment where you pay $40 for a portion. That wouldn't satisfy a determined squirrel. I arrived exactly on time, which was my first mistake. Punctuality in dating, I've learned, is often mistaken for desperation. I was shown to a table near the back, tucked into a corner that offered a view of the entire restaurant. The hostess, a willowy woman with the kind of cheekbones that could cut glass, seemed almost apologetic as she led me there. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Now I understand she knew exactly what she was doing. Some tables aren't just tables. Some spaces in this world are designated for specific purposes. And the universe has a way of putting people exactly where they need to be. 20 minutes passed, then 30. I ordered a glass of wine, then another. The waiter, a young man with kind eyes and an unfortunate mustache, kept glancing at me with that particular mixture of pity and concern that single women dining alone know all too well. I smiled each time, trying to project confidence while my phone remained stubbornly silent. No text. No call. Not even the courtesy of a cancellation. Around me, the restaurant hummed with the sounds of successful evenings. Laughter erupted from a table of friends celebrating something. A couple by the window leaned close, their hands intertwined, lost in their own private universe. Even the elderly pair near the bar seemed to be having a better time than me, their comfortable silence speaking of decades shared. By the 45-minute mark, I had composed and deleted 17 different text messages to Sarah, each one progressively more creative in its profanity. I had also consumed 3 glasses of wine on an empty stomach, which was doing absolutely nothing for my dignity, but quite a lot for my resignation to the situation. The waiter returned, his pity now mixed with something approaching admiration for my stubborn refusal to leave. That's when I felt it. That peculiar sensation of being watched. Not the casual glances of other diners, but something more focused, more intentional. The kind of attention that raises the small hairs on the back of your neck and makes your pulse quicken for reasons you can't quite articulate. I looked up from my phone, scanning the restaurant with what I hoped was casual disinterest. The place had gotten busier. A group of businessmen had claimed the large table near the kitchen. A birthday celebration was underway near the front, complete with an off-key rendition of the traditional song. But it was the booth in the far corner, the one I hadn't noticed before, that held my attention. 3 men sat there, but my eyes were drawn to only one. He occupied the center position, a throne in all but name, and even from across the restaurant, his presence was undeniable. Dark hair styled with casual precision, a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and a face that belonged on ancient Roman coins. Strong jaw, sharp cheekbones, eyes that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light. But it was his stillness that truly caught my attention. In a room full of movement and sound, he sat utterly motionless, a fixed point around which the chaos of the restaurant seemed to orbit. And he was staring directly at me. Not the furtive glances of someone people watching. Not the appreciative look of a man noticing an attractive woman. This was something else entirely. Assessment. Calculation. Interest of a variety I couldn't quite categorize. Our eyes met, and for a moment that stretched longer than physics should allow, the restaurant disappeared. There was only that gaze, dark and fathomless, holding mine with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable but instead felt oddly like recognition. I looked away first, my heart hammering in a way that had nothing to do with the wine. When I dared glance back, he was speaking to one of his companions, but I could tell his attention hadn't truly left me. It was like standing in a spotlight even after the light has moved on. You can still feel the warmth of where it touched. The waiter appeared at my elbow, startling me from my thoughts. He carried a plate, which was odd considering I hadn't ordered any food. My abandoned date certainly hadn't sent it. The waiter set it before me with a flourish that seemed both practiced and genuine. It was beautiful. Some kind of pasta dish with seafood, plated like a work of art. The kind of thing you see in magazines and assume has been styled by a team of professionals with tweezers. Steam rose from it in lazy spirals, and the aroma made my stomach remember it had been planning to eat dinner. "I didn't order this," I said, though my hands were already reaching for the fork. The waiter smiled, and this time his expression held something new. Respect, maybe. Or perhaps solidarity. "Compliments of the gentleman," he said, tilting his head in a direction I didn't need to follow. I knew exactly which gentleman he meant. "I can't accept this," I said, even as everything in me wanted to accept this. He was quite insistent, the waiter replied. Said something about how no one should sit alone in Marco's restaurant on a Tuesday night. Especially not someone who has been stood up with such spectacular rudeness. The casual mention of the establishment's ownership made me pause. Marco's. I had heard the name before, whispered in certain circles, but I had always dismissed it as urban legend. The kind of place where the city's real power brokers met. Where deals were made that never appeared in boardrooms or courtrooms. Where the line between legitimate business and something darker blurred into comfortable gray. "Tell him thank you." "But I'm fine," I said, proud of how steady my voice sounded. The waiter's smile turned knowing. "I'll tell him you said that. But between you and me, when that particular gentleman sends something to your table, the polite thing is to accept it. Trust me on this." He left before I could argue further. I stared at the plate, then at the corner booth. The man was watching again, and this time when our eyes met, he raised his glass slightly, a salute. An acknowledgement. A challenge. I picked up my fork. The food was exceptional, of course. The kind of meal that makes you understand why people become obsessed with cuisine. Each bite was a small revelation, flavors building on one another in ways that seemed both surprising and inevitable. I ate slowly, trying to maintain some dignity, but it was a losing battle. I was hungry, abandoned, slightly drunk, and the food was extraordinary. Halfway through the meal, my phone finally buzzed. A text from an unknown number. But the message made it clear this was my supposed date. The excuse was creative, at least. A family emergency involving his sister, a broken-down car, and somehow a confused GPS. The kind of lie that requires either tremendous creativity or tremendous stupidity to construct. He added that he felt terrible and wanted to reschedule. I deleted it without responding. Some bridges deserve to burn. When I looked out, the waiter was back. This time carrying a glass of red wine that definitely wasn't the house selection. I had been drinking. This was something else. Even in the dim restaurant lighting, I could see the quality. "Let me guess," I said. "The gentleman." "You're catching on," the waiter replied, setting it down with a care that suggested the bottle it came from was worth more than my car. "He also wanted me to tell you that you have excellent taste in wine, but that you've been underserved this evening. This is a Barolo, aged 15 years. He thinks you'll appreciate the complexity." "What makes him think I can appreciate the complexity?" I asked, taking the glass to spite myself. The waiter leaned in slightly, his voice dropping. He said, and I quote, "Anyone who sits alone with such grace while being treated with such disrespect clearly understands the value of both patience and dignity. Those are not simple virtues." The wine was incredible, rich and layered with notes of things I couldn't name but could certainly appreciate. It tasted like the kind of drink you have after important events, after closing deals or celebrating victories or mourning beautiful losses. I was now thoroughly confused, and if I was being honest with myself, thoroughly intrigued. The man in the corner booth had sent me an exceptional meal, an extraordinary wine, all accompanied by messages that suggested he had been watching me far more closely than I had realized. It should have been creepy. Everything about the situation should have triggered every warning bell evolution and experience had installed in my consciousness. Instead, I felt something else entirely. Curiosity. Interest. A strange sense that the script of my evening had been rewritten by an unseen hand, and that I was suddenly playing a part in a much more interesting story than the one I had expected. The restaurant continued its evening rhythm around me. More diners arrived and departed. The birthday celebration concluded with hugs and promises to do it again soon. The couple by the window paid their bill and left, still holding hands, still lost in each other. Through it all, I felt that constant attention from the corner booth. Not oppressive but present, like standing under a full moon. You can feel the light even when you're not looking at its source. I finished my meal, taking my time, refusing to be rushed by circumstance or expectation. The waiter cleared my plate with approval, treating my empty dish like a compliment to his professional judgment. He offered dessert, but I declined. There are limits to what one should accept from mysterious strangers, no matter how exceptional their taste in food and wine. I asked for the check, expecting the evening to conclude with whatever grace I could muster. What I received instead was a small card, cream-colored and expensive, with a single line written in elegant handwriting. Would you permit me to apologize for the rudeness of your evening with a proper conversation? No signature. No name. Just a question, phrased in a way that suggested the writer had been educated in an era when language was treated as an art form rather than a convenience. I looked up. The corner booth was empty. Or rather, it had been vacated except for the man himself. His companions had disappeared, leaving him alone at the large table, still and watchful. He stood as our eyes met, a gesture that seemed both old-fashioned and entirely natural coming from him. Then he began walking toward my table. This is the moment where any sensible person would leave, thank the waiter, pay the bill if necessary, and exit into the safety of the ordinary world. I am, occasionally, a sensible person. I reached for my purse, prepared to do exactly that. But then he was there, standing beside my table, and up close he was even more overwhelming than he had been across the room. Tall, probably 6'2" or 6'3", with a kind of physical presence that suggested both power and control. His suit was impeccable, dark gray with subtle pinstripes, worn with the ease of someone who had never questioned whether they belonged anywhere. But it was his face that truly captured attention. Not handsome in any conventional sense, but compelling in a way that made conventional handsomeness seem trivial. Forgive the intrusion, he said, and his voice matched everything else about him. Deep, controlled, with an accent that suggested European education and American adaptation. But I find I cannot let you leave without at least attempting to salvage your evening. You've already sent me an exceptional meal, and wine that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe, I replied, proud that my voice emerged steady despite my pulse doing complicated gymnastics. I think my evening has been salvaged adequately. A smile touched the corner of his mouth. Not a full smile, just a suggestion of one, but it transformed his face from intimidating to something more complex. That was merely an apology for the rudeness of your date. What I'm offering now is something different. And what exactly are you offering, mister? I let the sentence hang, an invitation to proper introduction. Dante, he said. My name is Dante Corsini, and I'm offering you the chance to turn a disappointing evening into a memorable one. Though I should warn you, I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to trust yourself. Your judgment, your instincts, the same things that told you to stay here with grace rather than leave in embarrassment. I should have asked more questions. I should have demanded explanations. I should have done any number of sensible things as sensible people do when approached by mysterious strangers in expensive restaurants. Instead, I found myself saying, my name is Elena, and I think I'd like to hear what you consider a memorable evening. He gestured to the empty chair across from me. May I? I nodded, and he sat with the kind of controlled movement that suggested either military training or martial arts background, probably both, up close. I could see details that distance had obscured, a small scar through his left eyebrow. Hands that were elegant but strong, with calluses that suggested he did more than sign papers for a living. Eyes that were not simply dark but layered with shades of brown and amber, like looking into deep water, where the bottom keeps revealing itself to be deeper than you thought. You're wondering who I am, he said. Not a question, a statement of fact. Among other things, I admitted. Mostly I'm wondering why someone like you was watching someone like me get stood up at a restaurant. Someone like me? He tilted his head slightly, genuine curiosity in his expression. Someone who clearly owns half the city and probably has people who own the other half on speed dial. Another almost smile. Your assessment isn't entirely inaccurate, though I prefer to think I facilitate arrangements rather than own things. Ownership is such a crude concept, don't you think? It suggests force rather than agreement. That's a very diplomatic way to avoid answering my question. I've been accused of many things, he said. Diplomacy is rarely among them. But to answer what you're actually asking, I was having a business dinner with associates. Dull conversation about duller subjects. And then you walked in, punctual and hopeful, and I found myself more interested in your story than in discussions of shipping contracts and territory negotiations. Territory negotiations, I repeated. That's an interesting phrase. It's an interesting business. We looked at each other for a moment, and I felt that strange sensation again. Recognition without understanding. Like meeting someone you knew in another life if you believed in such things. Which I didn't, except somehow in this moment I almost did. You still haven't told me what you're actually proposing, I said. Leave with me, he said simply. Not to anywhere inappropriate or dangerous. Simply to places in the city that you've never seen. The real city, not the one tourists photograph or natives complain about. The version that exists after dark, in the spaces between what's official and what's actual. That sounds both intriguing and potentially kidnapping adjacent. He laughed, a real laugh this time, rich and genuine. Fair assessment, So let me offer you control. My driver is outside. At any point, you tell him to bring you back here or take you home, and he will. No questions. No arguments. You're not my prisoner. You're my guest. Though I should mention that being my guest comes with certain privileges, such as safety access, the truth of things rather than the version we present to the public. He leaned forward slightly. Elena, your date tonight was a coward and a fool, but his failure has created an opportunity, not just for you to salvage your evening, but for something more interesting. I see dozens of people every day. Hundreds. They blur together into a mass of wants and needs and barely disguised desperation. But you sat here alone, stood up and embarrassed, and somehow maintained more dignity than most people achieve in a lifetime of trying. That's rare. Rare enough that I want to know more about the person capable of it. Maybe I'm just stubborn. Stubbornness is different than grace. One is resistance. The other is acceptance transformed into strength. You know the difference, even if you're pretending not to. I reached for my wine, buying time to think. Everything about this was absurd. Dangerous, probably. The kind of story that begins with poor judgment and ends with newspaper headlines. But there was something about him, something about this moment, that felt inevitable. Like the universe had been slowly arranging circumstances to bring me to this exact conversation. If I say yes, I said carefully, I need you to be honest about something. Ask, are you dangerous? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he seemed to consider the question with genuine seriousness, as if the answer was more complex than yes or no. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made me understand this was truth, not flattery or manipulation. Yes, I am dangerous, but not to you. Not tonight. Not ever. Unless you give me a reason to be. Which I don't believe you will. I exist in a world where danger is currency and power is survival. But I also exist by rules, Elena. Old rules. The kind that say certain people are off limits, certain lines don't get crossed, and certain sacred things remain sacred. Does that frighten you? It should, I said. But does it? I looked at him, really looked at him, trying to see past the surface to whatever truth existed underneath. What I found was complexity. Danger, yes, but also honor of a particular vintage. The kind of honor that doesn't appear in law books but governs entire hidden worlds. No, I admitted. It doesn't frighten me. Which probably says something questionable about my judgment. Or it says something excellent about your instincts. He stood, offering his hand. Come with me, Elena. Let me show you a version of reality you've only suspected existed. I looked at his outstretched hand. Strong fingers, elegant despite their evident capability for violence. A single ring on his right hand, gold with some kind of family crest. No wedding band, I noticed. Though that meant nothing. Men like him didn't advertise their personal situations with jewelry. This was the moment, the decision point, the place where safe. Ordinary Elena would thank him politely, decline gracefully, and go home to her ordinary life, where she would tell Sarah this absurd story over brunch, laugh about it, and gradually file it away as that one weird night that didn't mean anything. Or I could take his hand. I took his hand. His grip was warm, firm without being crushing, and the smile that crossed his face was genuine. Excellent choice, he said. Though I should warn you, most people who enter my world find it difficult to return to their previous perspective. Completely intact. Things are revealed that cannot be unrevealed. Maybe my previous perspective needed revealing too, I said, standing. My legs were slightly unsteady. Whether from wine or adrenaline I couldn't determine. Dante gestured to the waiter, who appeared instantly, and I watched as he handed over what appeared to be several large bills without even counting them. Take care of her table and add 20% for yourself, he said. And Marco, if you're listening from the kitchen, the pasta was exceptional as always. A door to the kitchen swung open briefly, and a large man with flour-dusted hands and an impressive mustache raised a spatula in salute before disappearing again. We walked to the front of the restaurant together, and I was aware of eyes following our progress. Not obvious staring, but that peripheral awareness people have when something significant is happening nearby. The hostess bid us good evening with a knowing smile, and then we were outside, where a black car waited at the curb as if summoned by telepathy. The driver emerged, opening the back door with practiced efficiency. He was young, maybe late 20s, with the kind of build that suggested both gym membership and practical application of strength. He nodded to Dante with obvious respect, then to me with careful courtesy. This is Marco, Dante said as we slid into the back seat. Not the same Marco as the restaurant owner, unfortunately. His mother had limited imagination with names. But he's been with me for 5 years and I trust him completely. Which means you can as well. The interior of the car was exactly what you'd expect. Leather seats, tinted windows, a partition between front and back that was currently open. Classical music played softly from hidden speakers. Mozart, I thought, though I wasn't certain. Where are we going? I asked as the car pulled smoothly into traffic. First, I thought I'd show you the city from a perspective most people never see. Then, if you're still interested, somewhere more private where we can actually talk. About what? I'm leaving open your story, mine. The nature of circumstance and coincidence. Whatever feels appropriate. We drove through familiar streets that somehow looked different. From behind tinted windows in a car that probably cost more than my annual salary. The city I knew, the one of daily commutes and weekend errands, transformed into something more dramatic, more cinematic. Buildings I passed every day revealed architectural details I had never noticed. People on sidewalks became characters in some larger narrative I was only beginning to understand. Dante remained quiet, letting me observe, and I appreciated his instinct to not fill the silence with empty conversation. Some moments deserve quiet. Some experiences need space to breathe. We climbed into the hills overlooking the city, the road winding up through neighborhoods that gradually shifted from urban density to spacious estates hidden behind gates and walls. The car turned onto a private drive, and we passed through security that seemed both invisible and omnipresent. Cameras, certainly. Probably motion sensors. Other measures I couldn't identify but could feel in the way the air itself seemed watchful. The house, when it appeared, was not what I expected. Not ostentatious or trying to hard like so many wealthy people's homes. Instead, it was elegant in its simplicity. Modern architecture that worked with the landscape rather than dominating it. Large windows that promised views of the city below. Lighting that suggested warmth rather than display. Marco opened the door for us, and Dante helped me out with a courtesy that felt natural rather than performed. "Welcome to my home," he said. "Though I should clarify that I have several residences. This is simply the one I prefer. The others are more for business or necessity. This one is for living." We entered through a doorway that led into an open-plan living space, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The view was breathtaking. The entire urban landscape spread below us like a carpet of light, stretching to the horizon where it met the darker expanse of the ocean from here. The city looked peaceful, beautiful. Nothing like the chaos and noise and struggle that characterized life at ground level. "It's spectacular," I said. Walking to the windows, "It helps with perspective," Dante replied, joining me. "When you spend your days dealing with the small ugliness of human nature, it's useful to have a reminder that we're all very small against the larger canvas. Makes the daily dramas seem less significant." "What kind of daily dramas?" I asked, though I suspected I knew the general category if not the specific details. He smiled. "The kind that are better discussed over proper drinks. What's your preference?" Surprised me. "You've been doing well with that tonight." He moved to a bar area, beginning to prepare something with the casual expertise of someone who has mixed countless drinks. I continued looking at the view, trying to process the surreal sequence of events that had brought me here. This morning I had woken up in my modest apartment, made coffee in my unreliable machine, chosen an outfit appropriate for both work and an evening blind date. A normal day for a normal person living a normal life. Now I stood in the home of a man who practically radiated danger and power, having accepted an invitation that any reasonable person would have declined. The Elena from this morning would have been shocked. The Elena standing here looking at the city lights was discovering she contained possibilities she hadn't previously acknowledged. Dante returned with 2 glasses containing something amber and sophisticated. "Whiskey," he said. "Japanese, aged 25 years. I have a weakness for things that have taken time to become what they are." We touched glasses and I took a sip. It was extraordinary, smooth and complex, with flavors that evolved as they moved across your palate. The kind of drink that costs more per ounce than most people's entire bar at home. "So," I said, settling into a chair that probably cost more than my monthly rent, "are you going to tell me what you actually do? Or do we continue this dance of elegant avoidance?" "Direct," he observed, taking the chair opposite mine. "I appreciate that. Most people in your situation would be more circumspect, afraid of offending or asking the wrong questions. Most people in my situation probably have better survival instincts, or less curiosity. Both are valid approaches to life." He set his glass down on the table between us with care. "My family has been in the import-export business for several generations. We facilitate the movement of goods and services in situations where traditional channels are either unavailable or inappropriate. We also provide certain security and consultation services for people who require discretion along with expertise." That's a very polished way of describing what I think you're describing. "Would you prefer I be crude about it?" "I prefer you be honest about it." He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw respect in his expression. "My family is what people politely call connected. We exist in the spaces between legal and illegal. Conventional and alternative, we have legitimate businesses. Certainly. But we also have other interests. We facilitate things, protect people, resolve disputes that courts and police either can't or won't address. We operate by rules older than the laws most people recognize. And we maintain order in communities and industries that would otherwise descend into chaos. You're part of organized crime. I'm part of an organization that deals with aspects of society most people prefer to pretend don't exist. Whether you call that crime depends on your perspective on law, order, and the nature of authority. I prefer to think we provide services that fill gaps in the official structures. I should have been terrified. Should have excused myself immediately. Demanded Marco take me home. Instead, I found myself asking, and you run this organization? I lead one branch of my family's interests. My father remains the head of the overall enterprise, but he's been gradually transitioning authority to the next generation. I handle the Western territories and anything involving technology or modern infrastructure. My brother focuses on traditional operations. My sister manages our legitimate business interests and does remarkable work, making us appear respectable to people who value such things. And none of this bothers you? The illegality of it? Legality is a human construct, Elena, not a universal truth. There are things my family does that I find distasteful or unnecessary, but there are also things we do that provide genuine good in situations where official channels have failed. We protect people who have nowhere else to turn. We resolve disputes fairly when the legal system is too slow or too corrupt. We maintain stability in industries that would otherwise be dominated by much more violent actors. It's complicated, morally gray in ways that make absolutists uncomfortable. I consider this, turning it over in my mind alongside everything else I had learned tonight. Why are you telling me all this? You just met me. For all you know, I could go straight to the police. You could, he agreed. But you won't. And not because I'm threatening you or intimidating you. You won't because you're intelligent enough to understand that what I've told you is both vague enough to be meaningless in court and specific enough to be honest. Also because you're curious about what happens next, and involving authorities would end that curiosity immediately. You're very confident in your assessment of my character based on a few hours of observation. I'm very experienced at reading people. It's a survival skill in my world. You make fast, accurate judgments or you don't survive to make any judgments at all. He leaned forward slightly. But more than that, I recognize something in you. A dissatisfaction with the ordinary. A sense that the life you've been living, while perfectly acceptable, is not the life you were meant for. You've been waiting for something to happen. I'm offering to be that something. That's quite an offer from someone who sent me pasta and wine. The pasta and wine were just the introduction. This conversation is the actual offer. We looked at each other across the space between our chairs, and the moment stretched and expanded the way significant moments do. Outside, the city continued its evening business, oblivious to the conversation happening in this room overlooking it all. Somewhere down there, people were having normal evenings, normal conversations, making normal decisions that would lead to normal consequences. I was no longer one of those people. Tell me about yourself, Dante said. Your real self, not the biography you give at professional events. The truth of who you are when no one's keeping score. So I told him about growing up in a family that valued security over passion, about studying art history because it was practical enough to satisfy my parents, but creative enough to satisfy something in my soul, about working in a gallery where I spent my days explaining other people's visions, while my own remained unexpressed and largely unexamined, about relationships that had been pleasant but never transformative, about a life that was perfectly fine in every way, except that it felt like waiting for something to actually begin. He listened without interrupting, his attention absolute in a way that I wasn't accustomed to. Most people listen while simultaneously composing their response or checking their phones, or thinking about what they want for dinner. Dante listened like it was his only purpose in that moment. Like my words mattered not just as noise but as actual meaning. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment before speaking. Do you know what I see when I look at you? He asked. Tell me. Someone who has been playing it safe for so long she's forgotten what courage feels like. But the courage is still there. It's in the way you sat alone at that restaurant maintaining your dignity. It's in the way you accepted my invitation despite every logical reason not to. It's in the way you're sitting here now, in the home of someone you just met, someone who just admitted to being part of organized crime, and instead of being terrified, you're curious. That's not ordinary, Elena. That's exceptional. Or foolish. The line between courage and foolishness is usually only clear in retrospect. Right now, in this moment, you're simply making a choice to experience something different. That's brave. I finished my whiskey, feeling the warmth spread through me. The alcohol, the conversation, the entire surreal nature of the evening was creating a kind of euphoria. Not happiness exactly. Something more complex. A sense of possibility. Of doors opening that I hadn't known existed. What happens now? I asked. That depends entirely on what you want to happen. I can have Marco take you home. We say goodnight. Maybe we exchange numbers and see each other again. Maybe we don't. Your evening gets filed away as an interesting story you tell at parties. Or we continue this. We see where it leads. No expectations. No obligations. Just two people who found each other through circumstance and curiosity. Continue this how? He stood, offering his hand again. Come with me. I took his hand, and he led me through the house, past rooms filled with art and books, and the accumulated evidence of a life more complex than I could begin to understand in one evening. We ended up on a terrace, open to the night air, with the city spread below us like a living map. The air was cool, carrying the scent of jasmine from somewhere nearby. Above us, stars competed with light pollution, mostly losing but still visible to anyone who looked up. Dante stood at the railing, looking out at his domain, and I joined him. My life is complicated, he said. Dangerous in ways I work very hard to mitigate, but can never fully eliminate. The people I associate with, the business I conduct, the responsibilities I carry, none of it is compatible with the kind of normal relationship most people want. I've accepted that, made peace with it. But tonight, watching you sit alone in that restaurant, I found myself wondering if perhaps I've been too quick to accept that isolation. If maybe the problem wasn't that the right person didn't exist, but that I wasn't looking in the right places, or perhaps wasn't looking at all, just assuming absence rather than investigating possibility. He turned to face me fully, and in the ambient light from the house and the city, his face held shadows that made him look both younger and older than he probably was, vulnerable despite his obvious power. I'm not asking for anything specific, he continued. I'm not even sure what I'm offering. I just know that I want to see you again. Talk to you again. Learn more about this person who maintained grace while being disrespected and courage, while being confused. Maybe that leads somewhere. Maybe it doesn't, but I think it might be worth finding out. This is crazy, I said. You understand that, right? This entire situation is insane. I came here for a blind date with a guy I'd never met and somehow ended up in the home of someone who's essentially admitted to being a crime lord, having the most honest conversation I've had in years. Crazy is relative. From my perspective, what's crazy is that someone like you has been wasting time with men who stand you up, in jobs that don't challenge you. That's the real insanity. You barely know me. You can't make assessments about my entire life based on a few hours. You're right. So give me more hours. Give me days. Let me make a more informed assessment. I laughed, the sound escaping despite the seriousness of the moment. You're very persistent. I'm very determined. There's a difference. Persistence is about wearing people down. Determination is about knowing what you want and pursuing it with clarity. I want to know you better, Elena. Not because I'm trying to add you to some collection or because I'm looking for entertainment, but because I think you might be important. And in my life, important things are rare enough to warrant attention. We stood there on the terrace, the city below us, the night around us, and I felt something shift. Not a decision exactly. More like a recognition that a decision had already been made. Probably the moment I took his hand in the restaurant. Everything since then had just been the elaborate justification for what I had already chosen. Okay, I said simply, okay? Okay, let's see where this leads. No promises about anything beyond that. No expectations of happily ever after or tragic endings or anything specific. Just to people who met under unusual circumstances. Seeing if unusual circumstances can lead to something real. The smile that crossed Dante's face was different from any expression I'd seen before. Not the controlled amusement or calculated charm. This was genuine pleasure, unguarded and warm. I can work with that, he said. We stayed on the terrace for another hour, talking about everything and nothing. He told me about growing up in a family where business and family were inseparable concepts, where loyalty wasn't just expected, but woven into the fabric of existence itself. About learning at 13 that his father's import company dealt in more than just legitimate cargo. About the moment he realized the path his life would take wasn't really a choice but an inheritance, and how he had made peace with that by deciding to do the work with honor even if the work itself existed outside conventional morality. I told him about my first experience with art that truly moved me, standing in front of a Rothko painting at 17 and understanding for the first time that color could convey emotion more powerfully than any words. About my mother's disappointment when I chose art history instead of something practical like law or medicine. About the quiet desperation of working in a gallery, surrounded by beauty and passion created by others while my own remained dormant and unexpressed. The conversation flowed with an ease that usually takes months or years to develop. None of the awkward pauses or forced transitions that characterize early acquaintance. It was like talking to someone I had known forever but was only now really seeing clearly. Around midnight, Dante's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowned slightly, then silenced it. "Business," he said. "Nothing urgent, but something I'll need to address eventually. The world doesn't pause just because I'm having an interesting evening." "I should probably go anyway," I said, though everything in me resisted the idea. "Some of us have work in the morning." "The gallery opens at 10, correct? I may have looked into your background a bit. That should concern me more than it does." "Probably. But I prefer thoroughness to surprises. I knew you were an art curator before I sent the pasta. I knew where you worked, where you lived, even what kind of wine you typically ordered. Not because I'm stalking you, but because I don't enter situations blind. Information is protection in my world." "And what did your information tell you about me?" "Facts. Addresses. Employment history. The surface data that tells you almost nothing about a person. What you've shown me tonight, the actual substance of who you are, that's not in any database or background check. That's something you can only learn by actually paying attention." He called for Marco, who appeared with the efficiency of someone who had been waiting nearby. The drive back down the hill was quiet, both of us lost in our own thoughts. The city streets were less crowded now. Late enough that the evening people had gone home, but early enough that the true night people hadn't fully emerged. We existed in that transitional hour, where the day's identity gives way to something more ambiguous. Marco pulled up in front of my apartment building, a modest structure in a decent neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but clean and safe in mine. Dante got out with me, walking me to the entrance like this was a normal date ending in a normal way. "I want to see you again," he said at the door. "Soon. Tomorrow if possible. Though I understand you might need time to process all of this. Tomorrow is probably too soon. I have this thing where I like to maintain some semblance of mystery and restraint." "How about the day after tomorrow then? There's an art exhibition opening at a private gallery downtown. Invitation only, very exclusive. I was planning to skip it, but with proper motivation I could be convinced to attend." "You're using art as bait. That's strategic." "I'm using context as enhancement. I want to see you in your element. Watch you interact with art you care about. Learn what makes your face light up the way it did when you talked about that Rothko painting. What if I'm terrible company at art exhibitions? What if I'm one of those insufferable people who pontificates about negative space and color theory? Then I'll learn that about you and adjust my understanding accordingly. Though somehow I doubt you're insufferable about anything. Passionate, maybe. Knowledgeable, certainly. But not insufferable." I pulled out my phone, and we exchanged numbers. His contact information was just his first name, no last name, no titles. A small gesture toward normalcy in a situation that was anything but normal. "The day after tomorrow then," I agreed. "But I'm meeting you at the gallery. No picking me up, no driver. I'll maintain that much independence." "Fair enough. I'll text you the details." He hesitated, then added, "Thank you for tonight, Elena. For taking the chance. For being brave enough to walk into the unknown with someone you had every reason to fear. I'm still not entirely convinced I shouldn't fear you, good? A healthy amount of caution will serve you well in my world. Complete fearlessness is usually just ignorance in disguise." He kissed my hand. Another gesture that should have felt antiquated, but somehow felt exactly right coming from him. Then he returned to the car, and I watched it pull away, disappearing into the sparse traffic of the late-night streets. Inside my apartment, everything was exactly as I had left it that morning. My coffee cup still in the sink, the outfit I had tried on and rejected draped over my bedroom chair, the mail I hadn't bothered to open scattered on the kitchen counter. Physical evidence of the person I had been 12 hours ago. Before pasta and wine and a man who existed outside the normal rules of society. I should have been exhausted. Instead, I was energized in a way that made sleep seem impossible. I changed into comfortable clothes, poured myself a glass of water, and sat by my window looking out of my small slice of the city. Not the dramatic panoramic view from Dante's terrace, but the intimate street-level perspective I had always known. The convenience store on the corner, the bus stop where I waited every morning, the tree that bloomed beautifully every spring and dropped annoying seed pods every fall. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah, sent hours ago, asking how the date went. I stared at it, trying to formulate a response. What could I possibly say? That her friend stood me up, but I ended up spending the evening with someone infinitely more interesting and exponentially more dangerous? That I had essentially entered into some undefined arrangement with a man who admitted to being part of organized crime? That the most honest conversation I had experienced in years happened in the home of someone who operates outside the law? I typed and deleted several responses before settling on something simple. Day was a disaster, but the evening had unexpected developments. We'll tell you everything at brunch this weekend. Vague enough to be true, specific enough to satisfy temporarily. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and strange. Dreamed of the city viewed from high above, of conversations in multiple languages I didn't speak but somehow understood, of standing at the edge of something vast and unknown with the choice to step forward or retreat. The next day at work felt surreal. I moved through familiar routines, gave my standard tour to a group of university students, handled correspondence with artists and collectors, attended a staff meeting about upcoming exhibitions. Normal tasks performed by someone who no longer felt entirely normal. My colleague Marcus asked if I was feeling well, noting that I seemed distracted. I blamed poor sleep and too much wine, both technically true if incomplete explanations. Throughout the day, my phone remained stubbornly silent. No text from Dante. No calls, nothing. I told myself this was good, that space and time were necessary to process what had happened. That rushing into constant communication would be unhealthy and obsessive. I was very convincing in these arguments with myself. I almost believed them. By evening, I had worked myself into a state of resigned acceptance. The previous night had been an anomaly. A beautiful, strange, impossible anomaly that belonged in the category of things that happen once and never repeat. Dante had probably reconsidered in the harsh light of day, realized that whatever interest he felt was temporary, decided that mixing his complicated world with someone as ordinary as me was unnecessarily messy. Then my phone buzzed. The Meridian Gallery. 7 p.m. the day after tomorrow. Dress code is formal. Artist is a sculptor from Milan, works primarily in bronze. I'm told his pieces explore the intersection of classical mythology and modern urban alienation, which sounds either profound or pretentious depending on execution. Looking forward to finding out which with you. I read the message 3 times. A smile spreading across my face despite my best efforts at maintaining cool detachment. Not just the details of our plan, but the editorial commentary. The suggestion that he was actually interested in my opinion about the art. The casual assumption that we would experience and judge it together. I responded with something appropriately understated. Formal I can do. Looking forward to it. No excessive enthusiasm. No multiple exclamation points. Just calm confirmation from someone who definitely hadn't been checking her phone obsessively all day. His response came immediately. Also, I should mention that the gallery opening is something of a scene. People from various aspects of city life attend. Some you might find interesting, others less so. Stay close to me, and everything will be fine. The phrasing caught my attention. Stay close to me, and everything will be fine. Not a suggestion, an instruction. The first hint of the protective control I suspected was fundamental to his nature. Are you warning me about something specific? I typed, just providing context. My world intersects with yours at events like this, but the rules are different. People will be curious about you, about who you are and what you represent. It's easier if they understand from the beginning that you're under my protection. Your protection. That's an interesting way to phrase it. It's an accurate way to phrase it. In my circles, associations matter. Being seen with me sends a message. I want you to be aware of that before you walk into it. I sat with this information, turning it over in my mind. This was a reality of what I had agreed to. Not just dates with an interesting man, but entry into a world where everything carried weight and meaning beyond the surface. Where being seen together was a statement, and statements had consequences. I appreciate the honesty. I finally responded. I'll be appropriately close, good. And Elena, we're something that makes you feel powerful. Confidence is armor in these situations. The next day passed in a blur of anticipation and preparation. I went through my closet 3 times, rejecting everything as either too plain or too trying. In desperation, I called my friend Vanessa, who had impeccable taste and access to connections in the fashion world within hours. She had secured a dress for me, black, elegant, with clean lines that suggested sophistication without desperation. The kind of dress that whispered rather than shouted. Where exactly are you going in this? Vanessa asked as I tried it on in her apartment, turning in front of her full-length mirror. Gallery opening. Very exclusive. And who exactly are you going with? I hesitated. Vanessa was perceptive enough that lies would be obvious, but the truth was too complicated for casual conversation. Someone I met recently. It's new. Still figuring out what it is. New isn't exciting new, or new isn't potentially concerning new. Both, probably. She studied me with the intensity of someone who had known me since college. You're different. Since whenever you met this person. More alive somehow. Like you've been running on half power and someone finally plugged you all the way in. That's oddly accurate. Be careful, Elena. Alive is good, but alive can also be dangerous if you're not paying attention. I'm paying attention. Good. And text me when you get home tomorrow night, just so I know you're safe. The day of the exhibition arrived with weather that seemed designed for dramatic events. Clear sky, temperature perfect for evening wear, a hint of wind that added movement without being annoying. I left work early, went home to prepare with the kind of care usually reserved for weddings or court appearances. The dress fit perfectly. Hair and makeup took longer than usual but achieved the effect I wanted. Professional but striking. Elegant without trying too hard. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. Same features, same basic structure, but something essential had shifted. Vanessa was right. I looked alive. The Meridian Gallery was in the warehouse district, one of those former industrial spaces converted into contemporary art venues. I arrived exactly on time, neither early nor late, and found the entrance already busy with arrivals. Expensive cars were depositing well-dressed people. A steady stream of the city's cultural and social elite gathering for an evening of art and networking. I gave my name at the door, and the recognition in the attendant's eyes was immediate. She didn't just check a list. She looked at me with sudden interest, made a subtle gesture to someone inside, and personally escorted me through the entrance. Corsini asked that we show you to him immediately upon your arrival, she said. He's in the West Gallery with the Baccarat pieces. We moved through the crowded space, past clusters of people holding wine glasses and having animated conversations. The art on the walls was contemporary, challenging, the kind of work that demanded engagement rather than passive appreciation. Under other circumstances, I would have stopped to examine pieces more closely. Tonight, I had a different purpose. The West Gallery was slightly less crowded and I spotted Dante immediately. He stood in front of a large bronze sculpture, a piece that seemed to depict multiple human forms merged into a single writhing mass. He was in conversation with two other men, both dressed with similar expensive taste, both carrying themselves with the kind of confidence that comes from power and position. As if sensing my presence, Dante looked up. Our eyes met across the gallery and something passed between us. Recognition. Anticipation. Confirmation that what had happened the other night hadn't been some alcohol-fueled imagination. He excused himself from his conversation and crossed to where I stood. Elena, he said, and my name in his voice sounded like something valuable. You're stunning. You clean up well yourself. He was wearing a tuxedo, perfectly tailored, the kind of formal wear that looks effortless only because of extraordinary attention to detail. His hair was styled with casual precision, and he wore a watch that probably cost more than a luxury car, but it was his expression that truly struck me. Pleasure. Genuine, unguarded pleasure at seeing me. Come, he said, offering his arm. Let me introduce you to some people. Then we can actually look at the art. What followed was a masterclass in social navigation. Dante moved through the gallery like someone who owned not just a space, but the very concept of spaces. People gravitated to him, seeking his attention, his opinion, his acknowledgement. He introduced me with careful precision. Not as a date, not as a girlfriend, simply as Elena, an art curator with exceptional taste. Enough information to establish my legitimacy, vague enough to leave a relationship undefined. I met artists and collectors, philanthropists and entrepreneurs, people whose names I recognized from society pages and business journals. Each interaction was brief but meaningful, and I began to notice patterns. The way certain people deferred to Dante with obvious respect, the way others approached with caution, seeking favor or permission for things never explicitly stated, the subtle hierarchies and alliances that existed beneath the surface of polite conversation. We were examining a particularly impressive bronze piece, a sculpture of a figure emerging from or being consumed by flame, when a woman approached. Tall, probably late 30s, with platinum hair, and the kind of beauty that suggested both genetics and expensive maintenance. She wore a red dress that commanded attention, and her smile was warm but her eyes were calculating. Dante, she said, kissing his cheek with familiar ease. I was beginning to think you wouldn't make it tonight. Isabella? He replied with politeness that didn't quite reach warmth. I wouldn't miss supporting Giovanni's work. His last show was remarkable. Indeed. Her attention shifted to me, assessment instant and thorough. And who is this? This is Elena. Elena, Isabella Marchesi. She runs the Marchesi Foundation, one of the largest arts endowments in the region. We shook hands, and I felt the strength in her grip. Curator, I understand, Isabella said. Where do you work? The Hastings Gallery. We specialize in contemporary emerging artists. Hastings. Lovely little space. Very intimate. The pause before intimate carried weight. Not quite an insult, but definitely a positioning of my professional status several levels below hers. We prefer to think of it as focused, I replied smoothly. Easier to build meaningful relationships with artists when you're not trying to fill a museum-sized space. A flicker of something crossed Isabella's face. Respect, maybe. Or at least acknowledgement that I wouldn't be easily dismissed. Well said. Dante, you'll save me a dance later? They're bringing in musicians for the reception. Perhaps, he said noncommittally. She smiled, kissed his cheek again, and glided away to charm another cluster of potential donors. Old friend? I asked once she was out of earshot. Old complication. Isabella and I have history that's both personal and professional. She understands my world because she exists adjacent to it. Her family's fortune comes from various enterprises that aren't always strictly legal. We've collaborated on certain projects, but she also occasionally mistakes past intimacy for current claim. Past intimacy. That's a very diplomatic phrase. We were involved briefly, years ago, before I understood that mixing business with genuine feeling was a recipe for disaster. She's brilliant and useful, but we weren't compatible beyond the surface. And she's okay with that assessment? Isabella is pragmatic above all else. She accepted the end of our romantic entanglement with grace, but she also hasn't entirely relinquished the hope that circumstances might change tonight. Seeing you with me sends a clear message that they haven't and won't. We continued through the exhibition, and I found myself genuinely impressed with the work. Giovanni, the sculptor, had created pieces that managed to be both classically beautiful and modernly disturbing. Figures caught in moments of transformation or torment, executed with technical mastery that elevated them beyond mere shock value. What do you think? Dante asked as we stood before the centerpiece of the exhibition. A massive bronze of Icarus falling, his wings fragmenting into shards that became cityscape buildings. I think he's brilliant, I said honestly. He's taking myths we think we understand and showing us we've been misinterpreting them. Icarus isn't falling because of hubris. He's falling because the world he's falling into is what destroyed his wings. It's not a warning against ambition. It's a critique of the society that punishes it. Dante looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. That's exactly what Giovanni told me he intended. Most people see the falling figure and stop there. You saw the building shards. I look at art for a living. Seeing what's actually there instead of what we expect to be there is kind of my job. It's more than your job. It's your nature. You see past surfaces. That's a rare quality. The reception portion of the evening began with speeches and toasts. Giovanni spoke briefly about his work, humble and articulate. Isabella gave a speech about the Foundation's commitment to supporting visionary artists. Others made remarks I only half listened to, more focused on the strange reality of standing in this world that wasn't quite mine, but somehow felt less alien than it should. Music started, a small ensemble playing something jazzy and sophisticated. Couples moved to an impromptu dance floor, and Dante extended his hand. Dance with me. I should warn you I'm not particularly coordinated. I'll lead. You just have to trust and follow. We moved onto the floor, his hand on my waist, mine on his shoulder, finding a rhythm that was easier than I expected. He was an excellent dancer, moving with the same controlled grace he brought to everything else. You're full of surprises, I said as we moved. I had a traditional education. Dancing was considered essential for someone in my position. All those charity galas and formal events require at least basic competence on a dance floor. Traditional education. Is that code for something specific? It's code for being prepared for a life where every skill might matter. I speak 4 languages. I can dance, fence, appreciate wine and art, discuss literature and philosophy. I can also shoot accurately at 100 meters, negotiate with people who want to kill me, and identify whether someone is lying based on micro-expressions. Different situations require different tools. That's quite a skill set. It's a necessary skill set. The world I inhabit requires both sophistication and violence, often in the same evening. Being able to navigate both is what keeps you alive and relevant. We danced through 2 more songs, and I became aware of eyes on us. Not casual observation but focused attention. People were watching, assessing, trying to understand what my presence with Dante signified. We're being watched, I murmured. Always. That's part of being with me. Everything is observed. Everything is interpreted. Every choice I make sends messages to multiple audiences. Dancing with you tells people you're important to me. How important is what everyone's trying to figure out? And how important am I? He pulled me slightly closer, his voice dropping to something only I could hear. That's what I'm trying to figure out myself. But I suspect the answer is more than I initially anticipated. The evening continued with conversations and connections, art and politics, and the complicated dance of people who exist at various levels of power and influence. Throughout it all, Dante remained at my side, including me in conversations, valuing my opinions, making it clear through actions rather than words that I wasn't decoration but participant. Around 11, he leaned close and asked, "Have you had enough of this? Or do you want to stay longer?" I think I've reached my capacity for networking and social performance. Good. There's somewhere else I want to take you. Somewhere quieter. We said our goodbyes, collected my coat, and emerged into the cool night air where Marco waited with the car. This time, instead of heading up into the hills, we drove toward the waterfront, to an area of the city I knew only vaguely. Warehouses and industrial buildings, most converted into lofts and studios, but some still maintaining their original utilitarian purpose. The car stopped in front of a building that looked abandoned from the outside. No lights, no signs, just a weathered door and a brick wall. Dante led me inside, through a dark hallway, and up a set of stairs that opened into a completely unexpected space. It was a jazz club, intimate and atmospheric, with maybe 30 people scattered at small tables surrounding a raised platform where a quartet played. The music was extraordinary, complex and soulful, the kind of performance you don't find in mainstream venues. The audience listened with genuine attention, no talking, just absorption of the sound filling the space. We were shown to a corner table, and drinks appeared without being ordered. The music continued and we listened in comfortable silence, letting the notes wash over us. This, I realized, was a real Dante. Not the powerful figure navigating social events with calculated precision, but the person who appreciated beauty and skill in moments of genuine artistry. Between sets, he turned to me. Thank you for tonight, for accompanying me to that exhibition, for handling Isabella and everyone else with such grace, for not being overwhelmed by the complicated circus that is my public life. Thank you for showing it to me, and for bringing me here. This is wonderful. This is real. The exhibition was necessary. This is what I actually enjoy. We talked between sets, the conversation flowing as easily as it had on his terrace, about music and art and the strange ways life arranges itself, about the paths we choose and the paths that choose us, about the difference between living and merely existing. The final set ended around 2 in the morning. We emerged into the quiet city streets, the night now belonging to the few people who either worked late or lived outside conventional schedules. I should get you home, Dante said, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced this was what he wanted. Probably for the best. Some of us had galleries to open in the morning. The drive to my apartment was quiet, both of us tired in the way that comes from full evenings rather than draining ones. When we arrived, Dante walked me to my door again, another gesture toward normalcy in our decidedly abnormal arrangement. When can I see you again? He asked. When do you want to see me again? Tomorrow. The day after. Every day, honestly. But I'm trying to maintain some semblance of restraint and not overwhelm you. How about dinner? Somewhere quiet. Just us, no crowds, no performances. I know just the place. I'll text you the details. He kissed me then, properly this time. Not on the hand or cheek but lips. And it was everything I'd been imagining since the moment we met. Controlled but passionate, confident but not aggressive. I kissed that promised both complexity and honesty. Then he was gone, back to the waiting car, leaving me standing at my door with my heart racing and my thoughts spinning. Inside my apartment, I sat by the window again, looking out at my familiar street that suddenly seemed like a threshold between 2 different versions of reality. My phone buzzed. Vanessa, checking in as promised. Still alive? I smiled and typed back. Still alive. More alive than I've been in years, actually. Good. Also terrifying, but good. She wasn't wrong. This thing with Dante, whatever it was becoming, existed in that space between exhilarating and dangerous. Every instinct of self-preservation suggested I should extract myself before becoming too entangled. Before his complicated world became a complicated world. Before the extraordinary nature of our connection led to extraordinary complications. But sitting there in my quiet apartment, I realized I had already made my choice. Not consciously. Not through careful deliberation and weighing of options, but through a series of small decisions, each one moving me further from the safe shore of ordinary life toward deeper waters, where the bottom was no longer visible. Whatever came next, I had chosen it, and somehow, that felt like the most honest thing I'd done in years.